Hello, Lagos, Nigeria. Welcome back to Borderlines, the only show that takes you beyond borders. It's an absolute pleasure. We have been trying to get him for quite a while now. As you can imagine, it's near on impossible. But he might have remembered me. He might have remembered me when we met in Israel. Perhaps that's why he eventually said yes. I don't know, but I've got with me the one and only, the controversial, the one that annoys everybody, the one that defends Israel with everything he's got and more. The former, and when I say former, it's only just recently a former. See, so he's a big fish. The former Israeli government spokesperson and international media advisor, and is now a podcast host. So yes, he's taking me. He's going to unemploy the rest of us now. He's taking us journalists for a ride. Eylon Levy, how are you? You didn't expect
Hello,
that, did
evening.
you? Yeah.
Good to see you again.
Yes.
No, it was one of the nicest introductions I've had in media, so thank you for that.
Well, look, I'm a nice person, and we are nice, and it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't cost anything to actually work on people, and we Nigerians are crazy like
You
that.
are right. You are right, and it's a shame that more people around the world don't take the same courtesy and basic politeness.
What can I say? So let's go. We've only got you for 30 minutes. Like I said, Lagos, Nigeria. I know you guys are joining from the abroad and all these places. You can send your messages to 0809 597 5805. You might be able to call and ask him a question. I don't know. He's only here for 30 minutes, but I get him first. He's my guest. Right, Eylon. Where are we?
Hello.
No, actually, before we even talk about where we are, so when you and I met in Israel, the one thing I connected with immediately, that obviously you're from London, and then you said you're from Finchley, and I'm like, what? I'm from Finchley. How did that happen? So how did you end up in Israel? You went to school in London, you grew up in London, you went to Goa. By the way, Lagos, Nigeria, Goa is a very posh school. Yes, he's posh. So you went to Goa. So how did you end up in Israel, first and foremost?
Well, you know, I imagine it's a story that many people in Nigeria will be familiar with, because you have a very large diaspora around the world, people who maintain a very strong connection with their homeland, their roots, their family. I was born to an Israeli family in London, but quite apart from that, Jews around the world have a very strong connection to Israel as our ancestral homeland, as the place that opens its doors to Jews all around the world to feel safe and feel at home. And when I finished my university studies in London, I decided that I wanted to move to Israel and serve in the military. This was at the end of another war in Gaza. 10 years ago, we had a war with Hamas. For 50 days, the terrorist organization in Gaza fired rockets at Israeli cities. And that war ended in a stalemate, essentially, because Hamas was left on its feet. And here we are 10 years later, licking our wounds in the middle of another war with Hamas, which is now a much bigger, more violent, more fearsome terror organization. Israel's committed this time to finish the job and finish Hamas once and for all and bring back the hostages. And so for me, the story is coming full circle, because 10 years ago, I moved to Israel at the end of a war with Gaza, and now I find myself as a government spokesman for the first half year of this war, now former spokesman, in another war with Hamas in Gaza, a war that we all hope will be the last one.
How is the Israeli society doing now? It's some 7 months after the Hamas attack. How is the Israeli society doing? We want to have an idea. Yes, of course, I'm obsessed with the news, but I'd like to hear it from your point of view.
Israeli society is very strong, very resilient. A country of people with strong social connections, a strong love of country, who are able to bounce back and pick themselves up. But the situation is rough in the country. It's rough for two reasons. It's been 7 months since October 7th. Without a doubt, the worst day in the history of Israel. And for those who've forgotten, because we relive this trauma every day, Hamas invaded Israel from the Gaza Strip by air, land, and sea. They sent death squads to hunt down as many people as they could, as brutally as they could. They burned whole families alive in their homes. They committed mass acts of rape and gang rape. They committed beheadings. They mutilated and tortured their victims, sometimes torturing children in front of their parents and parents in front of their children. It was an act of extreme cruelty and sadism that we didn't think human beings were capable of that. And Israelis look around the world now and think that everyone has forgotten about October 7th. They're focusing on the war in Gaza, on Israel's efforts to destroy Hamas. And they've forgotten that 7 months ago, we were the victims of the deadliest terror attack in world history after 9/11. And Israelis feel isolated and betrayed for the second reason. Hamas took 253 hostages. They abducted children from their beds. They abducted young people from a music festival. They took them into Gaza, and we know that they are starving and torturing and executing and raping the hostages.
Okay,
right
at this point, I need to question. You know that they are raping hostages right now. Eylon, how do you know that?
Yes, and the United Nations has confirmed it as well.
No,
The
but
Special
that
Rapporteur-
Hamas is raping the hostages they have in their captivity right now. How do you know that?
Yes,
How
and
would the
we have
United
one-
Nations know that?
We have one survivor of Hamas captivity. Her name is Amit Susana. She has very bravely been interviewed in the media, including in the New York Times, and explained how she was sexually molested in Gaza. We have other hostages who came out who have described hostages being raped at gunpoint. We
Okay.
have horrific descriptions from survivors of captivity telling us how they are abusing the hostages right now. And we know that Hamas committed acts of rape on October 7th as well. We know that from forensic information. We know that from eyewitness testimonies. And that's why the UN has said there's clear and convincing evidence that the hostages have been subjected to sexual torture
Okay.
and rape in Gaza.
What the
For Israel-
UN woman, I've forgotten her name, what she said when she did the investigation was that there is evidence that there could have been. She didn't actually proclaim that there was. That's one. The other thing is that New York Times article that you referred
There
to.
is clear and convincing information that
Yeah.
the hostages have been
Right.
subjected to
Yeah.
sexual
Right.
torture, and that was
Okay.
based on discussions with survivors and
Okay.
other testimonies.
Yes, right. So, and that New York Times article that you referred to has been discredited on several levels. You and I both know that.
No, no, no,
but,
no.
But
no, 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 no,
no.
no, 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 no. I am talking about the in-depth interview with Amit Susana, who was abducted on October 7th, was rescued in the first hostage release pause, has spoken very movingly to the New York Times, the president's residence here in Israel, and to other media as well, about how she was tied up and sexually abused inside Gaza. Unfortunately, those are the accounts that we are hearing from multiple hostages and from the psychologists who are taking care of them.
Okay. Let's go back to, like you said, Israel, the society itself is actually still bruised and traumatized by what happened on the 7th, which was a dastardly attack. However, the way you speak, one then has to ask the question, because you say everybody's focused on Gaza. Well, in Gaza, over 30,000, whatever number you choose to use, because everybody always argues over the number. For me, one is too many on both sides. So whatever number you choose, the fact of the matter is, in Gaza, over 30,000, etc., have been killed, right? Majority civilians, a lot of children, over 15,000 children, over 10,000 women. That is what is happening in Gaza. In Gaza, we see the videos, the pictures, we see the pain. So, is it any surprise that the world is focused on Gaza, given that Israel is executing a war that looks like it's against civilians, not Hamas, as they claim to be doing?
If I could just go back before I answer your question to the previous point. What has made October 7th especially difficult for Israeli society is the feeling that we've been abandoned and forgotten, especially the hostages. I remember when the Chibok girls were abducted in Nigeria and Hollywood celebrities marched up and down the red carpets holding signs saying, "Bring back our girls." And we haven't seen that same sort of solidarity or sympathy from around the world. And instead, we've seen people denying the atrocities of October 7th, downplaying the issue of the hostages, and that hurts a lot for Israeli society. But I'll answer your second question. The situation in Gaza is horrific. It is deeply sad. It's really heartbreaking to think that everyone who has been killed in Gaza since October 7th would still be alive if Hamas had not launched this war, and if it were not fighting this war from inside civilian areas. Hamas's strategy is to try to maximize civilian casualties, because unfortunately they know that that will put international diplomatic pressure on Israel. Hamas positions its military facilities and its tunnel network underneath schools, underneath homes, underneath hospitals, underneath mosques.
But where are they supposed to put it? Because let's even imagine you're telling the truth. Gaza is tiny, as you and I both know. Israel claims there's a 500 kilometers tunnel that Hamas has. 500 kilometers in a place like Gaza would literally, if Israel is correct, because it does seem a little bit crazy. I mean, you and I know the London Underground, right? It took hundreds of years to build that. So how Hamas, who is in a blockade called Gaza, is able to build 500 kilometers of tunnel? It's a whole, it begs to be questioned, but let's not move into that. My question is, where else would you expect?
I'll answer that because I think I think it's a really interesting question. I think it's a really interesting question. And it shows that Gaza's problem has never been about resources, but about priorities. When you see what the Palestinians in Gaza were capable of building, when you look at how much concrete went in, just the financial and logistical planning, you realize what the Palestinians in Gaza could have built, the amazing city-state by the sea they could have built, and instead they decided to take all that aid money, all that concrete, all those resources, and build the military machine that would be ready to perpetrate the October 7th massacre. And that's a crime that I hope Palestinians in Gaza never forgive Hamas for doing.
Okay, how do you build an economy when you don't have control over your border, when you no longer have an airport because the occupier has taken the airport away after they moved out of Gaza? How do you build an economy based on dependency when everything, Israel controls the gate into Gaza, Israel controls everything into Gaza? How do you expect an economy to be built from that?
Well, first of all, it's not true that Israel controls everything into Gaza. If you look at a map, you'll see that Gaza shares a border with Egypt as well. There are two main crossings into Gaza. One of them is through Israel, and one of them is through Egypt, which is its own sovereign state and controls that border. Now, Israel's policy in recent years was to allow goods, aid to flow into the Gaza Strip, and we see what they did with that. Every month, there were around, I think, 200 trucks of cement and concrete every day going into Gaza. And we know what
But Israel and Egypt own that border. Israel and Egypt control that border. It isn't Palestinians that control that border. But we haven't got time. You see why you should have stayed for an hour.
The Palestinians control their side of the border. We control our side of the border, and the Egyptians control their side of the border.
The Palestinians do not have control over any border, Eylon.
Well, they have control. No. They have control of the Gaza side of the border.
Well, they have control of Gaza.
The side of the border. And then once you're inside Gaza, it's Hamas that controls that.
That's what I'm saying. So they have control over Gaza, not the border. Otherwise, as you said, they've built tunnels. There wouldn't have been a need to build all those tunnels. But there's something that I want to ask you.
No. Hamas, I think we're confusing two different issues here. Israel controls the Israeli side of the border. You cross the border and you're inside Gaza. Hamas controls the Gazan side of the crossing. Now, Hamas decided to
Israel decides who goes through that. Israel decides who. Okay, Eylon, tell me something. Can I, if I was a Palestinian and I'm flying in from Nigeria, right? I have to get permission, even if my family home is in Gaza. I have to get permission from Israel to actually go into Gaza. Even when I came to Israel, when I met you in Israel, I asked to go to the Palestinian side. We were not allowed to go to the Palestinian side. And I have my sister. Well, I did ask. Remember, it was the Israeli officials that were taking us around. I did ask, and they wouldn't let us. But because of time, and I wish it was staying for an hour. An hour ago,
I just want to make it, if I could just make it clear for listeners who perhaps less familiar with the geography, Gaza shares a border with Egypt.
Correct.
Through that border with Egypt, tens of thousands of Gazans were going in and out every year, interacting with the world through Egypt. And again, it's tragic that Hamas decided to use those borders instead of importing things and building a prosperous future for the Palestinians, which they could have had after Israel withdrew in 2005. There's no reason they couldn't have built a prosperous Gaza. They decided to take those resources and build the military machine to produce October 7th.
Okay, let me go back. There's an announcement that was made about an hour ago. Israeli ambassador to the UN, Gilad Erdan, addressed the United Nations National Assembly, and he described Palestine as a terror state and equated it with Hitler. If Israel insists on its rights to exist, why is it opposed to the rights of the Palestinians to exist?
First of all, Israel has no objection to the Palestinians' right to exist. There's nothing that we want than to live in peace and security with our neighbors. But Israelis have learned some very difficult lessons in history. Every time Israel has withdrawn from territory in the hope of receiving peace, that territory was taken over by terrorists and we got war. In 2000, Israel withdrew from southern Lebanon, and the area was quickly taken over by Hezbollah, an Iranian proxy, a terrorist organization that has the 8th largest stockpile of missiles around the world, and for the last 7 months has been firing rockets non-stop at Israel. We have refugees.
Well, Israel has America and everybody, and Germany actually giving it ammunitions to fight, and Hezbollah.
I'm just trying to explain. I'm happy to answer that, but I'd just like to explain how things look from the Israeli side.
Okay.
We pulled out of Lebanon, it got taken over by Hezbollah. During the Oslo Accords in the 1990s, we pulled out of the major cities in the West Bank, and we got suicide bombings in the early 2000s. We pulled out of the Gaza Strip in 2005, and we received tens of thousands of rockets and the death squads of October 7th. Israelis know that when you pull out of territory in the Middle East, it doesn't get taken over by liberal Democrats. It gets taken over by bloodthirsty terrorists like Hamas, like in the style of ISIS and Boko Haram that will be so familiar to your listeners. There's nothing more that we would want than to live in peace with our neighbors. Unfortunately, we know that every time we pull out of territory, it gets used as a launch pad for attacks that end up murdering hundreds, if not thousands of Israelis.
So are you then saying, so why then did Israel withdraw from southern Lebanon?
Israel withdrew from southern Lebanon because it understood, was hoping that by withdrawing to the international border, we would be able to end the conflict with the militia forces in southern Lebanon. There was an ongoing guerrilla war by Lebanese factions that didn't want the Israeli army there. Israel pulled out thinking, well, that'll end the conflict with the militant groups in Lebanon. And instead, they've become so much more powerful. We now have 150,000 rockets being pointed at Israel right now from Lebanon, from territory Israel vacated. Again, in 2005, Israel pulled out of the Gaza Strip, pulled out the army, pulled out settlers, 10,000.
And also took the airport, took several things with them. Let me ask you something. Would you not say that Hezbollah... I'm rushing because I don't have time.
Well, I'll gladly give you some more time.
Okay.
If it means that I can give you fuller answers.
Okay, go ahead.
Israel is a very, very small country. I don't know how many Israels you can fit in Nigeria, but I wonder whether listeners just now would imagine for themselves, how long does it take to drive from Tel Aviv to the Gaza Strip? You might know because you were here a few months ago. It's about 45 minutes or an hour to get from Tel Aviv, which is considered the center of Israel, to the Gaza Strip. If we allowed Gaza to have its own airport, you would be allowing Hamas to be able to launch planes that would be able to hit Tel Aviv in a matter of seconds. That is not a threat that anyone can tolerate. I don't think that Nigeria would imagine giving Boko Haram its own airport a 45-minute drive away from Abuja.
Boko Haram and Nigeria, they're domestic terrorists. They're not the same as Hamas, who will tell you that they are fighting. They are fighting for the emancipation of their people. Go ahead.
But it's a very similar question, because that is not a security threat that anyone in Nigeria would tolerate. If you were told that in order to have peace with Boko Haram, you need to give them an airport a 45-minute drive from Abuja.
But that literally wouldn't happen. That literally wouldn't happen, Eylon. That literally wouldn't happen because...
Of course it wouldn't happen,
because
and it would be insane here.
Yeah, but it's a false comparison, if I may say so. But let me go back to what you were saying about Hezbollah.
But the threat would be the same.
Okay.
The reason that Israel cannot allow Hamas to have an airport is
not Hamas. Okay, are you conflating then?
Used to attack Israeli civilians.
Are you then saying that because every time I say Palestinians, you keep saying Hamas? Are you then saying that Palestinians are Hamas and all Palestinians are members of Hamas?
I'm saying that Hamas is the government of Gaza.
Right.
And if you were to have an airport in Gaza, it would be controlled by Hamas.
Okay. Hamas, who is the government of Gaza, was actually emboldened and given money and support by Qatar through Netanyahu. So one could actually say Hamas is the government of Gaza because of Israel. That is the true statement.
No, it would ignore the fact that in 2006, the Palestinians had their last elections and they voted Hamas into power. It would ignore the fact that in 2007, Hamas launched a violent coup in which they overthrew the Fatah government. When I say overthrew, they literally threw rival politicians out of windows in buildings and violently took over Gaza in a coup in 2007. Now, at that point, Israel had a choice to make. Do you want to find a way to live next to this terrorist regime in Gaza, or are you going to try to remove it from power?
Why didn't Israel stop Hamas from getting power in the first place? If there was such a terrorist organization, why then the Prime Minister Netanyahu literally said anybody that wants to deal with the Palestinian problem should actually support Hamas? Wouldn't it have been better to not to have allowed Hamas? What did he say?
No.
I paraphrase him. What did he say?
The Prime Minister has never said that you should. The Prime Minister has never said you should support Hamas. The Prime Minister has been very clear and very consistent that Hamas is a violent terror organization.
No, he hasn't, Eylon. Eylon, this is not true.
Not just to Israel.
This is not true.
The Prime Minister. So I would advise you to ask your research assistants during our broadcast.
No, I'm finding the quote for me now. For you now.
Hamas.
No, this is not true.
Not said that. Let me explain. So on what date did he say it?
Well, it certainly isn't now, because he wouldn't be saying so now, would he?
When did he say this alleged quote that you're quoting at me? Where did he say it? When did he say it? The Prime Minister has said that you should support Hamas.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. Yes, he did, Eylon. I'm getting you the quote and I'll give you the dates. Don't worry, they're getting me the quote. Okay, so my researchers are getting me the quote.
In the meanwhile, I'll answer your question.
Go ahead.
In the meanwhile, I'll answer your question. Hamas takes over the Gaza Strip. Israel then has a dramatic choice to make. Do you try to topple Hamas, or do you try to find a way to live next to it? And Israel decides to find a way to live next to it. Why? Because we know what the cost of war would be. Because nobody wanted a war to remove Hamas from power, because that's what we're doing now, and look what the human cost is. So Israel said, we're going to lose too many soldiers. Too many civilians are going to be killed if we go to war against Hamas. We need to find a way to live next to this barbaric terror organization. And do you know why Israel allowed Qatar to send Hamas money? Not because we support it. It's an evil, barbaric terrorist organization that is sworn to the destruction of Israel, but because Israel was trying to buy time and buy quiet. Israel thought that Hamas could be bought off. Israel thought that Hamas could be bribed. And if they were given suitcases full of money from Qatar, then maybe Hamas would forget that it wants to destroy Israel, and we would be able to bribe them.
Okay,
and
the times of Israel. The times of Israel
failed on October 7th.
Okay, the times of Israel, and I'm quoting here, I'm going to read this. For years, the various governments led by Benjamin Netanyahu took an approach that divided power between the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, bringing Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas to his knees while making moves that propped up the Hamas terror group. The idea was to prevent Abbas or anyone else in the Palestinian Authority's West Bank government from advancing towards the establishment of a Palestinian state. This is from the times of Israel. It's not from anywhere else. It goes on. Thus, amid the bid to impair Abbas, Hamas was upgraded from a mere terror group to an organization with which Israel held indirect negotiations via Egypt, and the one that was allowed to receive infusions of cash from abroad. Hamas was included in the discussions about increasing the number of work permits Israel granted to Gazan laborers, which kept money flowing into Gaza. So when you say, please, when you were saying to me your prime minister didn't support Hamas, I had to share. I mean, I could go on. Israeli officials said the permits which allowed Gazan laborers. It goes on and on and on. So let's not deny something that is a fact. There are some things that I can't argue with you, but this one is a fact.
Let's not deny the fact. But before this war, the world wanted and demanded that money and resources flow into Gaza. Now look, this strategy of trying to bribe Hamas to buy quiet failed. It failed.
Okay.
It exploded on October 7th because it turned out that Hamas really is an evil terrorist organization sworn to our destruction. And they tricked us. In the years before, you mentioned work permits. I think that's really interesting. In the few years before October 7th, Israel announced a new policy of allowing more Gazans into Israel to work in southern Israel, in construction, in agriculture. What did we think? We thought that if Gazans are coming into Israel, earning good money, going back, paying their taxes, then the government of Gaza, Hamas, will say, we don't want war with Israel because the situation is getting better for people on the ground. And even though Hamas is a terror organization, it also really enjoys being in power. And Hamas won't want to jeopardize that. So we'll continue allowing money to go into Gaza. We'll continue to let workers going into Israel, because if we do that, Hamas won't attack us.
Eylon,
and they tricked us.
Eylon, the strategy, that was not the strategy, I read it out. The strategy was to divide the Palestinians so that Prime Minister Netanyahu could claim there was no partner of peace amongst the Palestinians. The strategy, look, Israel right now says, if I may, Israel right now is saying that Hamas can no longer be the government of Gaza. Correct? Israel right now is saying they want the Palestinian Authority. The same Israel that pretty much handicapped the Palestinian Authority from being able to be the primary ruler in Palestine. Israel at some point needs to make up its mind what it wants. So my question is, what does Israel want?
We want to live in security. We want to be able to go about our lives free of fear, that terrorists a few miles away from our homes are going to fire rockets that will force us to run into bomb shelters. We want to live in security, knowing that we can go to sleep and terrorists are not going to invade and abduct us from our beds, that they're not going to rape our women, that they're not going to storm our music festivals and mutilate people.
And how do we get
not
there?
Going to burn
So,
Israeli
okay then,
families alive.
from the Israeli point of view, how do we get there? How do we get to that place? This wonderful, beautiful, living existence navigation that you've just spoken about. How does Israel get there?
That's an excellent question. And it's been the most difficult question for the whole of Israel's existence. How do we achieve security when we are surrounded by people who want to kill us? How do we achieve security when we are surrounded by hostile countries, terrorist organizations, Iran that is on the brink of getting a nuclear weapon and sending money to terrorists all around us?
But Israel, when Israel bombed Iran, the Iranian consulate first. Can I just say something?
Well,
every time
you mentioned something, so I'd like to respond.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Israel has, for the last few months, let's zoom out. Israel has been under attack on 8 different fronts. We're not only getting attacked from Gaza. On October 8th, Iran's proxy army in Lebanon, Hezbollah, started shelling Israel. We've had rockets from Syria. We've had UAVs from Iraq. We've had a ballistic and missile drone attack from Iran. We've had attacks from Yemen as well, who keep shooting rockets at Israel. And we've had attacks coming from the West Bank. There's even a terrorist group in Bahrain backed by Iran that claims that it's been attacking Israel. Israel has been under consistent attack by Iran every day since October 7th through its proxy armies. Now, a few weeks ago, when Iran launched 350 ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones at Israel, it was the first time that Iran had attacked Israel directly from its soil. And make no mistake, this was an unprecedented, massive attack that was designed to overwhelm Israel's missile defenses. But Iran has been attacking Israel every day since October 7th through the terrorist armies in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Yemen, all around the Middle East, that it has funded and armed and trained with the goal of encircling Israel and attacking us. And so the fundamental question that every single Israeli asks themselves every day is, how do we keep ourselves and our children safe in a neighborhood when we are surrounded by religious Islamic fanatics who want to kill us all?
Okay. Iran has consistently, from October 7th, yes, Israel has consistently pointed fingers at Iran. Iran keeps repeating, we had nothing to do with October 7th, we're not involved, right? Israel clearly didn't believe them, and I'm not saying Israel should. Well, that is what they're saying. Come on, that's what they've been saying. I'm not saying you should. I'm saying, in their defense, that is what they've been saying. However, Iran has constantly said,
secret.
Yeah, but the axis of resistance is, they've always said they are part of the axis of resistance, but they do not control Hamas, right? They've always said that. Now let's go back to what you were saying about secure. It's important that Israelis of whatever nationality or religion feel secure. How does Israel begin to feel secure at the expense of the rights of the Palestinians? How does Israel begin to shape its own safety when it is not allowing the Palestinians to have their autonomy, to have their freedom, to have their emancipation? Let me give you a quote by Tony Blair. If we go back to the election that brought in Hamas in 2006, Tony Blair said, and I quote, "We were wrong to boycott Hamas after its election win." He went on to say, "We should have engaged with Hamas." There's a point where we are now, and I have been to Israel. I have seen those videos, the video that the IDF showed us in the secure location, and they still haunt me till today.
The video of the atrocities. From
Yes. Remember the 45 minutes video at the time, the one that was seen at the. How do we ensure? Because every Palestinian, if you ask every Palestinian, they will tell you, all we want is our freedom. Even if we run it badly, it doesn't matter. We just want to be free. Even if we end up with a rubbish Hamas government, we just want to be free. So how does Israel expect to have peace if you don't give a people their own freedom and full emancipation, as the apartheid regime in South Africa had to give?
I'm sure you've been following the protests against Israel around the world, and you'll have noticed that the most popular slogan that people chant is "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." Which
I've also heard from Prime Minister Netanyahu. I've heard that from him in one of his videos.
From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That's what they chant. Now, between the river and the sea, you have the sovereign state of Israel. The call for "From the river to the sea" is not a call for a Palestinian state next to Israel. It's a call for a Palestinian state instead of Israel. That is what the Palestinians fundamentally want. I've never seen any Palestinians correcting the protesters around the world and saying, no, we don't want from the river to the sea. We want to live next to Israel. The fundamental problem in this conflict, and it's been the problem from the very beginning, is the persistent Palestinian refusal to accept a Jewish state anywhere in the borders of the land of Israel. That's why on several occasions that the Palestinians have been offered a state, they've turned it down. And their leaders continue to insist that when they speak of the occupation, they're not talking about 1967. They're talking about 1948 and the establishment of Israel. They regard the whole of Israel, including Tel Aviv, a whole country that has 20% Arab citizens who are equal citizens and vote and are elected into parliament. They regard all of that as being occupied. And Israelis say, if we give the Palestinians territory, that's not going to solve the conflict. It's going to make it worse.
Why?
Because we're afraid to use that territory to attack us, just like we left southern Lebanon and we got Hezbollah. Just like we left the cities in the West Bank and we got Palestinian suicide bombers. Just like we left Gaza in 2005 and we received Hamas. Israelis fear that if we were to leave the West Bank, you would have rocket attacks on Tel Aviv, and where I'm sitting now, I would have 10 seconds to run for shelter. Israelis fear that since the overwhelming majority of Palestinians, according to their own opinion polls, believe that the October 7th massacre was legitimate and justified, that if we give them territory, we'll get another October 7th on a bigger scale. Because again, Israel isn't the size of Nigeria. If you were to give the Palestinians the West Bank, Israel would be only 9 miles wide between the Palestinian state and the sea. That's it, 9 miles. So if we want to solve the conflict, and we want everyone between the river and the sea to live in peace and security and prosperity, which is definitely what I want, we need the Palestinians to give up the dream of destroying Israel and building a state instead of it. And I truly believe that on the day that we have a Palestinian leader who is brave enough to say that the Jewish people have a right to self-determination in their ancient homeland, in the land of the Bible, in the land that the Jewish people come from, and that all that Palestinians want is to live next to Israel, and they don't want to destroy all of it, on that day it will be possible to have peace.
Okay.
But if you think that Israelis are going to give up territory 10 miles away from Tel Aviv and risk having rockets at Tel Aviv and death squads like on October 7th, you're not going to make the situation better for Israelis or Palestinians.
Okay,
the situation will only be worse. I don't want it to get worse.
Okay, but Israel created Hezbollah and Hamas as a result of the occupation. But let's go back. There are Arabs, and I saw them. There are Arab Israelis, correct? There are Arabs in Israel.
There are, yes. 20% of, by the way, I find there are many myths about Israel that people are not familiar with. You want to hear something really shocking I heard a while ago? Someone from an American university campus told me that they spoke to someone who was shocked to discover that there are black people in Israel. They thought everyone in Israel is white. They didn't know that half of people in Israel are descended from Jews who fled from Arab countries. They didn't know that Israel has tens of thousands of citizens who are Ethiopian Jews who were rescued in emergency flights from Ethiopia. They didn't know we're a multicultural, multiracial society. They thought Israel is a white country. That's one of the myths.
Okay.
Another one of the myths is people don't realize that Israeli Arabs are free citizens who vote and sit in Israel's parliament and Supreme Court and are equal citizens of our country. And it blows their mind when they discover that. Well, that's not what they're taught.
Well, those Israeli Arabs you're talking about, they're Bedouins, and just the other day, their community was being taken down. But let's go back to what I was getting my original question.
Some of them are Bedouins. Some of them are Bedouins, but they're a diverse society.
Right.
Some
so
of them are Christians.
So okay. So the rights.
Some live in cities. Some are Bedouins. It's a diverse population.
Okay. So if we go with what you're saying, and your claim is that Arabs, Israelis have the same rights as Israel, as Jewish Israelis. Here's a question for you. Since Israel, as you said, does not want to give up the land because they don't trust that Palestinians will not attack them, why then not give all Palestinians Israeli citizenship? Why not create one truly multicultural country made up of descendants of Abraham, which both Palestinians and Israelis are? Why continue to actually treat one different to the others? I mean, I could literally give you examples of Ethiopian Jews, Ethiopian Jewish women who were forced, and as you know, who were forced into forced abortion. Okay, yes, there were. I mean, you want me to find a link to read that to you? I will find a link and read it out. But you know that. There's apartheid. When I was in Israel, one of the things that I did, and I did speak to a black woman there, and you wouldn't have known. The people that took me there wouldn't have known. She was serving or something. And I was able to get from her how she feels. And no, she didn't feel that she had equal rights at all, but she couldn't say that. So one of the things she did was, you default to what you've got because that is where you live. So let's come back to the Palestinians. If Israel truly wants peace, if Israel claims that Israel isn't an apartheid country, if Israel claims that they're not an occupier, Israel claims that the Palestinians are wanting 1948, but Israel is willing to give 1967, why doesn't Israel create one state solution with everybody equal rights like we have in South Africa?
Sure. You raised two very interesting points. I'll address the first one. First of all, the Ethiopian population in Israel are cherished members of our society. Just a few years ago, the contestant that Israel sent to Eurovision was a wonderful Ethiopian Israeli singer called Eden Elena. A few years ago, Miss Israel was a beautiful Ethiopian Jewish woman, a friend of mine, Titi Aino. They've served in parliament. Do they, are they underprivileged? Absolutely. We have a long way to go to bring this community up in line with the national average. But they are absolutely treasured members of our community and part of the rich cultural fabric of our country. Now, as to your second question, Israel is based on the idea that the Jewish people, after thousands of years of being persecuted around the world, in all the many places where they were minorities, have a right to govern themselves. And they have a right to govern themselves in their ancestral homeland, in the place that we are originally from, the land of the Bible, the land of Israel, as it was known in antiquity. Because after thousands of years of persecution, we know that when we are a vulnerable minority at the hands of regimes that don't like Jews, it doesn't end well. And in the 20th century, it led to the Holocaust, the genocide of 6 million Jews at the hands of the Nazis and their accomplices. And the lesson that Israelis drew, the lesson that Jews drew, is that we need to take our fate into our own hands. We have a right to be the masters of our own destiny, to govern ourselves, to keep ourselves safe. Now, do you know what the most popular Palestinian party is? It's Hamas. If you're talking about a one-state solution, you are talking about a country in which Hamas would either sit in the parliament or form the government. What do you think would happen to me in a country in which the terrorist organization that burned families alive and committed acts of gang rape on October 7th is the government? What do you think would happen to me living under a fundamentalist Islamic regime that has much more...
How is it? No, but Palestine... No, you've said that many times. But Palestine is a mixed religious country. You have society. You have Christians and you have Muslims. Till date, I've interviewed Christian Palestinians. I've interviewed Muslim Palestinians. None has spoken against each other. So when you keep saying that Palestine is a fundamentalist Muslim community, I think that is incorrect.
Well, they certainly do have a very small Christian community.
They're small because Israel also took out the Christian Palestinians when it kicked out the majority of Palestinians in 1948. In fact, the Reverend of Jerusalem, I think it is, he actually said, I think that's his title, he said there are just 1,000 Christians left in Jerusalem. Israel has a bill that's in the Knesset.
That is definitely not true.
Okay, what's true then?
That is not true, but you've raised a number of very interesting points. First of all, it's true that the Palestinians have a small Christian minority. But it doesn't change the fact that Hamas and Fatah and Palestinian society alike don't believe that the Jewish people have a right to live and govern themselves in their ancestral homeland. They think that we're foreign occupiers or colonizers, and they deny our historic connections to our ancient homeland. Now, when you talk about a one-state solution, you're talking about a state that would have a Palestinian majority. And you are talking and
hold on, say that again.
In Israel now.
Sorry, say that again. If we have a one-state solution,
if you were to have one state between the river and the sea, it would be a state that would be majority Arab.
What's wrong with that?
The Jewish citizens of Israel, who are currently free members of a liberal democratic state, that with all its flaws is by far the freest and most liberal country for thousands of miles away, should be vulnerable minorities in the hands of a Palestinian movement that has made very clear that we have no right to live here at all. It would be a recipe for mass political violence against Jews and Israelis. That is why we say, as Israel, we want to be able to separate from the Palestinians. Israel's official policy is, we want to give the Palestinians all of the rights to govern themselves, but none of the rights to threaten us, because the most important thing for us is literally, how do we stay alive? Okay. How do we keep ourselves safe in a region surrounded by people who want to kill us? And I truly believe, and I have hope, I really do have hope after October 7th, that one day we will find a Palestinian leader who is brave enough to say that the Jewish people have a right to live and to have a state of their own in their ancient homeland, and they want to live next to Israel and not instead of it. Okay. And on the day that we have a Palestinian leader who's able to say that, I truly believe we'll be able to make peace with our neighbors.
Okay, going by what you've said, Ehud Barak, let me give you a quote. He said, if he was Palestinian, This is Ehud Barak. He said if he was Palestinian, he would join the resistance. Doesn't that then tell you that even if a whole Ehud Barak can say that, then clearly Hamas is a resistance group, because from occupation comes resistance. The South African Nelson Mandela resisted the apartheid. He and his group also ended up forming what Margaret Thatcher, who both of us grew up under, what Margaret Thatcher called a terrorist group. Yet Nelson Mandela was a peace lover. He was forced to do that. Let's go back to the IRA. The IRA constantly had to use force in order to get their freedom from the Brits. Where are the IRA today? They are now going in and out of Downing streets. They formed the majority government. So again, I go back to this thing. If Israel truly wants peace, why then doesn't Israel give the Palestinians freedom? Give them the freedom, let them have their airport, let them be able to vote, let them have their military, let them have everything. Because then if they come after Israel, then it becomes a fight of equals. Right now, you don't have a fight of equals. You have the occupier killing the occupied. That's what you have.
We don't want to fight between equals. We don't want to fight at all. We want peace. And as I said before, we learned the hard way that when we hand over territory, it creates a power vacuum that gets filled by terrorists. That's just history. Israel ended the occupation of southern Lebanon in 2000, but Hezbollah didn't go away. It built a missile arsenal of 150,000 missiles.
But Israel also has this thing. Eylon, are you saying that Israel is the only one that's allowed to have ammunition to defend itself? Because that's what I keep hearing from you.
I'm saying that I want to live. And my country will not take steps that will make it easier for our enemies to fire rockets at our cities, abduct babies from their beds, or rape women at a music festival. We pulled out of Lebanon. Hezbollah didn't go away. It got stronger. We pulled out of the cities in the West Bank. Palestinian terrorists didn't go away. They started building suicide belts and they attacked buses and cafes in Israel. We pulled out of Gaza in 2005. The Palestinians could have had a free state in Gaza after 2005. They could have announced, "Thank you, Israel, for leaving the Gaza Strip. We want to have peace with you." But no one suggested it, because the Palestinian movement as a whole, there are some exceptions, but the Palestinian movement as a whole is still committed to the vision of destroying the state of Israel.
Okay, I'm going to have to interrupt you because we're running out of time. Do you agree?
Just let me finish my sentence.
Okay.
Just let me finish my sentence. Because it's the first duty of any state to keep its civilians safe. Israel is not going to give control of the mountains overlooking Tel Aviv and surrounding Jerusalem that cut the country off to being only 9 miles wide to people telling us that they want from the river to the sea.
I need to interrupt you. I'm running out of time.
Just finish quickly. As long as the Palestinians tell us that they want from the river to the sea, Israel is not going to give them all the territory from the river to 9 miles away from the sea so that they can finish the job and continue atrocities like they did on October 7th. We have to ensure the security of our citizens, and the Palestinians have to change their narrative about wanting to destroy Israel.
Okay, so is Israel has actually given out, we need to, oh my gosh, we're running out of time. This is such a good conversation, Eylon. Right, so.
We ran out of time half an hour ago.
I know, right? I'm actually running out of time for the actual show, which is crazy. The lines are going.
I'm half an hour late for dinner, but you ask important questions and questions that I think many of your listeners we'll have misconceptions about, and so I'm happy to clear those misconceptions about Israel.
Let's quickly talk Rafah, right? So Biden has said they're not going to support Israel with ammunition for Rafah, right? Prime Minister Netanyahu has said, "We will go it alone, even if we have to use our fingernails." That's a quote. Yeah. And he said, "We have more than fingernails." Ben Gavir, your Minister of Security, suddenly yesterday, or was it the day before, does a post on Twitter and says, Biden loves Hamas. Or is it Hamas loves Biden?
No, it was the other way.
Right, Hamas loves Biden.
Hamas
loves Biden.
He wrote Hamas loves Biden.
That's right.
He wrote Hamas loves Biden.
Right. So why does Israel, what is Israel looking for in Rafah? If Israel keeps saying they want peace, and Hamas has accepted the peace proposal, which the Americans were happy with, but Israel is the only one that's saying, we don't want it anymore. Blinken was looking forward to it.
Hamas did not, unfortunately, accept the ceasefire proposal. I wish they had. We had a deal on the table that was supposed to get a temporary pause in the fighting and for us to get 33 live hostages back. Hamas said, we're not going to give you 33 live hostages. We'll give you 33 hostages alive or dead, which could mean that they want to give us the bodies of 33 hostages they have murdered or starved or allowed to die in captivity. Now, Israel is committed to getting all the hostages back so their families can bury them with dignity, but we want to get the live hostages out. And right now, Hamas is refusing to give back the live hostages. Israel's operation in Gaza has two goals. One, to destroy Hamas. It has only 4 battalions left standing, and Israel wants to destroy the Hamas military machine so it can never...
Whilst killing 1.3 million Palestinians who are in refuge in Rafah.
No. While before going in, Israel set up an expanded humanitarian zone with field hospitals, with tents that we bought, with access to food and water. The world has said Israel must protect civilians, and Israel said, we agree. That's why we're encouraging civilians to evacuate for their own safety
100,000
away from Rafah, where Hamas is trying to hide behind them. And the second thing that Israel wants to do is, of course, to put pressure on
100,000
Hamas to release the hostages. Now, you've seen the protests around the world on college campuses. Young people getting pretty fed up with the war in Gaza. You know where young people are really fed up of the war in Gaza? Here in Israel, because they're the ones fighting it. Because they've been stuck in military reserve service for the last 7 months. But Israeli young people know that we can't end the war abandoning the hostages or leaving Hamas in power. Because if we don't finish Hamas off after the atrocities of October 7th, there will be a next time, and it will be worse.
Because Eylon, you need to promise to come back. The news is here. She's giving me dirty looks.
I will promise if you let me complete my sentence.
No, I'm sorry, because it's because it's because I was worried that you were going to go, and then now we're literally eating into the news bulletin.
Well, you know what? If you tell me afterwards that your viewers and listeners enjoyed
the lines are going crazy.
Found it useful.
The lines are going
I will gladly,
crazy. They want to ask you questions.
And I'll tell you one thing better. I'll even take questions directly from your listeners. How about that?
Excellent, excellent. Because the lines are going crazy and I haven't been able to pick up any of the lines. Thank you so much, Eylon. My producer will be in touch with you. Thank you so much for making the time.
Pleasure.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Ciao,
Have a
ciao.
good and peaceful weekend.
Yes, you too. Bye-bye.
.3 Nigeria Info. We are more than just radio. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Nigeria Info FM. Check us out on Facebook at Nigeria Info 99.3. Follow us on Twitter at Nigeria Info FM and on Instagram at Nigeria Info FM Lagos for live updates as it happens. 99.3 Nigeria Info.